All right, back again, trying super hard to get through the book because I know some of you want to watch the series that's going to be starting on Disney Plus tomorrow, the 25th. So here we go. We are starting at the chapter that's called Stand and Falls. It is on page 437. Mr. Curtin? Mr. Curtin, sir, buzzed SQ's voice through the intercom. For Rainey, the interruption could not have come at a better moment. For what seemed an eternity now, he had watched Sticky alternately frown with effort and smile with relief, his tea-colored skin almost going as pale as honey, and perspiration trickling down his cheeks like tears. But the frowns had at last faded away, replaced entirely by the pleasant, contented smiles. Sticky had made a great effort, but in the end he couldn't help it. He had stopped resisting. Mr. Curtin, however, did not welcome the interruption. After a night with too few sessions, he'd finally gotten a messenger into his whisperer again, only to struggle unexpectedly. The machine had gone bulky as an old donkey, losing Mr. Curtin's train of thought, and sometimes misunderstanding him altogether. Usually the mental effect for him was of speaking into a telephone and hearing his own voice in the receiver. But this session had been like hearing himself through a staticky radio. Something wasn't right. It was the boy. It must be. And Mr. Curtin had just begun to suspect that George was an unfit messenger after all, that in fact he might be untrustworthy, when the session improved. The boy's mind grew more receptive. The whisperer's wrinkled messages straightened, and Mr. Curtin had at last settled into some real productive work. He was just finishing the session when the interruption came. Mr. Curtin, please, sir, it's an emergency. Rats and dogs, Mr. Curtin said furiously, thrusting off his red helmet. Behind him, the cuffs and blue helmet freed Sticky, who rose, wobbling in a state of weak confusion. Rainey leaped forward to support him. What is it, SQ? Mr. Curtin said, pressing the intercom button on his wheelchair. It had better be important. It is, sir. 2 students are trying to break into the tower. Rainey closed his eyes. His heart sank. The executives knew what the girls were up to, and SQ was already outside the door. It was over then. After all this, after Sticky had been so brave, had tried so hard. 2 students, Mr. Curtin was saying. By students, you mean children, do you not? Yes, sir, came SQ's uncertain reply. Do you mean that to tell me that you can't prevent 2 children from breaking in? Well, sir, we're sure to comprehend, apprehend. We're sure to catch them soon. I just thought I should alert you. Thank you, SQ, said Mr. Curtin, who did not sound at all thankful. Consider me alerted. And by the way, unless you are presented with an actual emergency, I want no further interruptions. Understood? Yes, Mr. Curtin, came SQ's reply. Sorry, Mr. Curtin. With a disgusted shake of his head, Mr. Curtin exclaimed, Children? Am I supposed to fear unarmed children? No doubt they are in cahoots with my prisoner. Unlikely agents, but no matter. They'll soon join him. He grew silent, staring intently at Sticky, as if considering how best to cut him up and cook him. George, I'm afraid I was not terribly pleased with your performance. No, in fact, I was rather displeased. Reynard will take over for you now. We will see about you later. There could be no doubt what Mr. Curtin meant by we will see about you. But Sticky was too exhausted at the moment to be afraid. He only shook his head. He had done all that he could. Mr. Curtin gestured impatiently toward the cushions, and Rainey helped Sticky over to them. Sticky collapsed. Rainey turned to meet Mr. Curtin's gaze and saw in those silvery, reflective lenses his own uncertain, frightened face. "The time has come, Reynard," said Mr. Curtin. "Unsatisfactory though your friend's session has been, we are none the less close. Very, very close." Mr. Curtin coughed and wiped his pale, moist brow. As if to himself, he mumbled, "I'm afraid I must pause for refreshment, though, but only for a moment. It can't hurt to savor the occasion at any rate. A cup of juice, then. Do you hear me, Reynard? I shall have a cup of juice. After that, only a few minutes more, and then, the improvement will begin. Can you believe? I scarcely believe it myself." Mr. Curtin's face, though pale and drawn, quite gleamed with exultation. His dream was on the cusp of becoming a reality. Rainey glanced at the whisperer. Then his glance hardened into a focused gaze. He couldn't tear his eyes away. Didn't the whisperer look inviting, comforting? It almost seemed to be speaking to him, whispering to him, all the way over here. Was it whispering to him? Whispering the unthinkable thing? "Don't struggle for nothing, Reynard. You can still join Mr. Curtin. Be important. Be a part of something." But Mr. Benedict," Rainey thought, he needs me." "Mr. Benedict? Is he the one who tricked you into joining him? Who encouraged you to cheat on quizzes? Who offered you special opportunities? Or was that Mr. Curtin who said cheating doesn't bother him? Who rounded up poor unfortunates only to give them a better life? Who has offered you a chance to be an executive? How different are the two men. Not very, Reynard. The only difference is that you can offer you only suffering, is that one can offer you only suffering now, while the other offers you a way to belong, a way to relieve the loneliness. Shaken, Rainey thought to himself, "But Miss Prumel, you can help her. You can warn her. Tell her to keep quiet about the voices in her head. You'll have Mr. Curtin's ear. You can vouch for Miss Prumel. You can protect her." Rainey clasped his hands to his head. But what would she want me to do? At such a cost? No, she wouldn't. And yet, it's impossible. There's no way out. Mr. Curtin had just finished his juice and was watching Reynard watch the whisper. "You've missed it, I see," purred Mr. Curtin. "Well, miss it no longer. Take your seat, Reynard. Take your rightful place." Rainey's mind was so foggy. Had Mr. Curtin said, "Your rightful place?" Or was that in his own mind? And who had been talking to him before that? Wasn't it the whisperer? No, he realized. Unfortunately not. It wasn't the whisperer at all. It was Rainey himself. "Reynard!" Mr. Curtin prompted. Rainey made his way towards the whisper. The session would go quickly, a few minutes, Mr. Curtin had said, and then it would be over. And then, he swallowed hard, what would happen to Constance? Would something dreadful happen to her when Mr. Curtin boosted the power? And what would become of the others? He looked back at Sticky, slumped on a cushion in a posture of weary defeat. Despite his terror in the face of the whisperer's irresistible power, Sticky had resisted with all his might. He would never have done that if not for Rainey's urging, and now it had put him in danger, in disfavor with Mr. Curtin. Was Rainey really going to help Mr. Curtin? It would be a betrayal of friendship. And Kate, to think of what they'd been through together, and the risks that she'd taken. "Le the curtain!" The cuffs clasped around Rainey's wrists. The helmet was lowered. Rainey closed his eyes, only to see the faces of his friends. He remembered the final question of Mr. Benedict's first test. Are you brave? Now, at least, Rainey knew the answer. He wasn't brave. He had only hoped he was. Good, said the whisper. What is your name? Just get it over with quickly, Rainey told himself. Welcome, Reynard Muldoon. Welcome, Rainey repeated. Yes, welcome was such a word, a welcoming word. It made you feel a part of something. It made you feel not alone. No, he was not alone at all, and yet, Reynard Muldoon, what do you fear most? In his mind's eye, Rainey still saw the faces of his friends, Sticky, Kate, Constance, all watching him with concern. They'd been through so much together. Was he really going to betray them? You could never be more alone than if you betrayed your friends, Rainey said to himself. Instantly, the whisperer's voice said, Don't worry. You will never betray your friends. You are brave enough. Rainey was so startled he almost laughed aloud. The whisper was too perceptive for its own good. At the most important moment of all, it had given him just the encouragement that he needed, the encouragement to help him fight it. Let us begin, said the whisper. Rainey was flooded with a terrific sense of well-being, real well-being, not an illusion at all. He would not betray his friends. He knew that now. He had confronted his worst fear, and now it was gone. No need for the whisperer to deny it. There was nothing left to deny.